Same. Heaven. Most people who have ever sat inside a church, ever opened a Bible, ever whispered a prayer into the dark of a sleepless night, carry the same picture in their mind when they hear that word. Light. A single, luminous place, somewhere above everything, warm and distant and vaguely welcoming. One place, one heaven. And tonight, I want to tell you something. Gently, but very directly. That picture is incomplete, not wrong in what it holds, but far, far too small for what the oldest manuscripts actually preserved, because there is a text, a manuscript that has survived 3,000 years, passed through the hands of ancient scribes, copied carefully in old Slavonic monasteries, studied quietly by scholars who understood exactly what they were holding. Oh, and that text does not describe one heaven. It describes six distinct layers, 6 separate worlds, stacked above this one, each governed differently, each populated by different beings, each carrying a different weight, a different atmosphere, a different moral reality, and each one given a name. The text is called To Enoch. Some scholars know it as the Slavonic Apocalypse of Enoch. And tonight, this is the manuscript we are opening together, not as a curiosity, not as a controversy, as a preserved witness to a picture of heaven so specific, so architecturally detailed, so different from everything most modern believers have ever been handed, that when I first read it carefully, I sat very still for a long time. Now, I want to tell you exactly what this night holds before we go any further, because you came here tonight with a specific promise in mind, and I intend to keep it. Tonight, we are going to walk through all 6 layers of heaven, exactly as 2 Enoch describes them, layer by layer, name by name, detail by detail. We are going to meet the angels who govern the weather. In the first layer, we are going to stand with Enoch in the second layer, where something exists inside heaven that no church service, no Sunday school lesson, and no popular Bible study has ever shown you. We are going to enter the third layer, where paradise and its shadow exist side by side in the same level of heaven, separated only by direction. We are going to pass through the fourth layer, where the sun and the moon travel escorted by thousands of angels, whose names have been preserved in manuscripts most people have never heard of. We are going to stand in the fifth layer, inside a silence so specific, so heavy, that the text uses one phrase to describe it that changes everything about what worship actually means. And we are going to arrive at the sixth layer, where something waits that I believe is the most quietly comforting piece of ancient cosmology ever preserved outside the standard biblical canon. And then we will rest. The seventh layer. 2 Enoch does not fully describe from inside. It only says that Enoch approached it, and the words used in the Slavonic manuscript to describe what he encountered at that threshold. I will give you those words before this night is over. And when I do, I think you will understand why the ancient scribes who copied this text chose to stop writing at exactly that point. Now, before we enter the first layer, I want to tell you where this manuscript comes from, because that matters. The text, known as 2 Enoch, the Slavonic Apocalypse of Enoch, is not something invented by modern mystery channels. It is a serious, ancient, carefully studied manuscript. Its oldest surviving copies are written in Old Slavonic, preserved in medieval monasteries across Eastern Europe and Russia. But scholars who have spent their lives studying ancient languages believe the original was composed much earlier, possibly in the 1st century of the Common Era, possibly earlier still, with roots reaching back into Jewish cosmological traditions that were already ancient when the first surviving copies were made. The text was not included in the standard biblical canon. That is true, but the reasons for that are more complicated than most people assume. What matters tonight is not the politics of canon formation. What matters tonight is what was preserved inside this text. While other traditions were narrowing their shelves, while councils were voting, and lists were hardening, and certain streams of sacred memory were being quietly thinned out of ordinary devotion, someone kept copying 2 Enoch. Someone kept handing it forward. Someone believed that the picture of heaven it contained was worth preserving tonight. We honor that preservation, not with argument, not with controversy, with slow, careful, reverent attention, the kind of attention these pages have always deserved. So let me tell you the one detail, the one small specific thing inside this manuscript that stopped me the first time I read it carefully. Not the 6 layers themselves, not the angels, not even the paradise described in the 3rd heaven. It was something much smaller than all of that. It was a name, one name, found nowhere else in the entire ancient world. Not in the standard Bible, not in 1 Enoch, not in the Dead Sea Scrolls, not in the Book of Jubilees, not in any other preserved manuscript from the ancient Jewish or early Christian world. One name, belonging to one archangel, whose entire assignment in the 6th heaven is to make sure that nothing is forgotten. We will get to that name, but first, we begin at the bottom, at the layer closest to where you are lying right now. The 1st heaven, the threshold, the place where the sky you see above you becomes something else entirely. Something governed, something populated, something that has been quietly watching over this world since before your great-grandmother's great-grandmother drew her first breath. Stay with me, night traveler. We are going in. I want to tell you how I came to this manuscript, because it was not through a dramatic discovery. It was not through a conference, or a lecture, or a documentary that promised hidden secrets in a loud voice. It was through a single line, one sentence, sitting quietly inside a passage I had read before, that I had moved past too quickly every single time, until one night I didn't. I was sitting late, the way I often sit late, when the day has finally gone quiet, and I was reading through the early chapters of 2 Enoch, the Slavonic Apocalypse a text I had known about for years but never truly slowed down inside, and I came to the passage where Enoch first enters the second heaven, and the text said something that stopped me completely. It said that inside heaven, inside one of the layers of heaven, there were angels in darkness, weeping, not on earth, not cast down into some underground place, inside heaven itself, in darkness, weeping. And Enoch, this human being, ascending through the layers, was so moved by what he saw that he wept with them. I put the page down and I thought, how many times have I read about heaven and never once encountered that image? How many sermons had I heard? How many hymns had I sung? How many times had I pictured heaven as a single uniform brightness, with no room in it for that kind of sorrow? And here was a text, 3,000 years old, preserved through centuries of careful copying, telling me that heaven is more honest than I had been taught, more complete, more willing to hold the full weight of what exists, without pretending any of it away. That was the moment 2 Enoch became something I could not leave alone. I am Pastor Michael, and what I do, what I have always done, is sit with the old texts long enough to hear what most readers miss when they move too quickly. Not the headline, the line underneath the headline, the detail that was always there, waiting for someone to slow down enough to feel its weight. Tonight, that detail is the architecture of heaven itself, and the text that preserved it more completely than almost any other ancient source is a manuscript most people in the modern Western world have never once been offered. 2 Enoch. Let me tell you a little more about where this text comes from, because the more you understand its journey, the more remarkable its survival becomes. The oldest copies we have of 2 Enoch are written in Old Slavonic. They were found in monasteries, in libraries, in collections across Eastern Europe and Russia. The earliest surviving manuscripts dating to somewhere around the 14th century. But the text itself, the original composition, is believed by most serious scholars to be far older than those copies. The leading researcher on 2 Enoch, a scholar named Andrei Orlov, has spent decades arguing that the cosmological traditions preserved in this text reflect Jewish thought from the late Second Temple period, roughly the 1st century before or after the Common Era. That means the ideas in this manuscript, the picture of heaven it carries, the 6-layer cosmology it describes, were already circulating in ancient Jewish communities around the same time the New Testament was being written, and in some cases, possibly before. Now, why was it not included in the Bible most of us grew up with? That question has a long and complicated answer, but the short answer, the honest answer, is this. Canon formation was never a single clean event. It was a slow process, shaped by geography, by language, by which communities had access to which texts, by which councils met when, and by which streams of ancient memory were still flowing strongly enough to be recognized as authoritative by the communities doing the deciding. 2 Enoch flowed through a different channel. It survived in Slavonic, which meant it was carried by Eastern Christian monastic communities, rather than the Latin-speaking Western Church that shaped the Bible most modern readers know. It was not suppressed in the dramatic sense. It was simply carried differently, by different hands, through different mountains, into different libraries. And because of those different hands, tonight, we have access to a picture of heaven that the standard canon does not provide. A picture with 6 layers, with specific names, with populated chambers, with moral weight distributed across levels, and with one detail in the 6th layer that I have thought about more than almost anything else I have encountered in years of studying these ancient texts. But before we get to the 6th layer, before we get to that name I mentioned, we have to begin where Enoch began. At the bottom, at the first heaven, the layer that is furthest from the throne and closest to you. The layer that governs the sky above your roof tonight. The layer where, according to 2 Enoch, angels have been working quietly on your behalf since before this world learned to call itself a world. There is something I want to say before we enter it. Something I noticed when I first read the opening of Enoch's ascent, that most summaries of this text leave out entirely. When Enoch arrives at the first heaven, the angels there bow to him, a human being ascending, and the first citizens of heaven greet him with reverence. I have sat with that image longer than I expected to, because it says something about what this text believes a human being actually is. Not a visitor tolerated by a greater world, but a creature whose arrival is considered worthy of welcome, even in heaven, even at the first layer, even before anything else has been revealed. Remember that image. Night, traveler. It will matter more by the time we reach the 6th layer. Now, before we go any further, I want to pause here for just a moment. If these nights of ancient scripture and hidden manuscript detail are bringing you something your days have not been giving you, a quietness, a sense of being held inside something older and larger than the noise of the present hour, then stay close. Because what comes next in this text, what Enoch finds when he moves past the first layer into the second, is something I've never heard preached from a pulpit, never heard discussed in a Bible study, never heard named in any church service I have attended in all my years of pastoral life. And it changes permanently the picture of what heaven is willing to hold. Before we continue, night traveler, I want to pause here for just a moment, because what comes next in this manuscript, what Enoch encounters as he moves through these 6 layers one by one, builds slowly and carefully, the way ancient texts always build when they are telling you something they consider genuinely important. And by the time we reach the 5th layer, the picture of heaven this text has been constructing becomes something so different from what most believers have been handed that when I first sat with it fully, I did not reach for another book. I did not reach for my notes. I sat very still, and I let the silence of that 5th layer settle over me. Because there is a silence described in the 5th heaven of 2 Enoch that is unlike any silence I have encountered in any other ancient text. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of something that once sang and stopped. We are going there tonight, all the way through, layer by layer. And if nights like this one, nights of old manuscripts, hidden cosmology, and ancient sacred detail told slowly enough to actually rest inside. If nights like this have become something you return to, then a quiet subscribe keeps this path open for you. It means the next time the world feels too loud and the night feels too long and you need something older and steadier than whatever the day left behind, Pastor Michael's Rest will be there, waiting, just like tonight. And I want to ask you something softly. Before we go any further, when did you last feel truly still, not tired, not distracted, truly still? Hold that question gently. You don't have to answer it out loud. Just let it rest somewhere near you as we go in. Because the first layer of heaven, according to 2 Enoch, is closer to that stillness than you might expect. Now, let us begin. The first heaven in 2 Enoch. When the angels come to Enoch in the night, 2 great beings standing at the foot of his bed, shining with a light the text says was brighter than anything the sun produces. They do not take him up gently into a warm and comfortable brightness. They take him up into structure, into organization, into a world that is already deeply, specifically, and carefully arranged. And the first thing Enoch sees, the very first layer his human eyes encounter as he ascends above the earth, is not what most people picture when they imagine heaven. It is not golden streets. It is not a throne room. It is not the faces of departed loved ones waiting in light. It is a very large place, full of working angels, angels with assignments, angels with specific responsibilities, angels who have been doing the same careful work since before human history had a name for itself. And they are governing the sky above your head right now, tonight, as you lie here and listen. The first layer of heaven, according to this 3,000-year-old manuscript, is already in motion above you. Let me tell you exactly what 2 Enoch says Enoch saw there, because the details matter. The details are always where the real picture lives. When Enoch enters the first heaven, the text describes a vast expanse, an enormous sea of what appears to be crystal or glass, spread above the earth like a second sky above the sky. And moving across that expanse, 200 angels, not vague celestial presences, 200 specific beings with specific faces and specific tasks. The text says they govern the stars, they govern the clouds, they govern snow and ice and dew and rain. They govern the movement of weather across the face of the earth. Every frost that has ever settled on a field at night, every cloud that has ever carried rain across a dry valley, every morning dew that has ever appeared on grass before the sun came up, according to 2 Enoch, was sent, was ordered, was governed by beings in the first layer, carrying out assignments so old that the oldest human civilizations were not yet born when those assignments began. Now, I want to pause here because I think this detail does something important to the imagination. Most of us have been taught, consciously or not, to think of the natural world as a mechanism. Weather happens because of pressure systems. Rain falls because of evaporation and condensation. Frost forms because of temperature and humidity. And all of that is true in the language of the physical world. But 2 Enoch is not speaking the language of the physical world. It is speaking the language of the governed world. And in the governed world, there is no such thing as weather that simply happens. There is only weather that is sent by beings who were given that responsibility, before the first human being ever looked up at the sky and wondered what was moving there. I find that thought very quietly steadying, not because it changes the science, but because it changes the feeling of being rained on. It changes the feeling of watching snow fall. It makes the natural world feel less like a machine and more like a letter, written by a hand that knew you would be standing there when it arrived. Now, let me tell you about the specific class of angels two Enoch places in the first and second heavens, because this is where the text introduces a term that most readers pass over it quickly. And passing over it too quickly means missing something that changes the entire picture. The word is Grigori. Grigori. In the Slavonic text of 2 Enoch, this is the name given to a specific class of angelic beings associated with the first and second heavens. And the moment you understand what that word means, and where it comes from, and why it appears in this specific text, in this specific way, the architecture of the 6 layers begins to make a different kind of sense. The word Grigori, in the tradition behind 2 Enoch, means watchers, those who are awake, those who watch. Now, most people who have spent any time with ancient texts have encountered the word watchers before, usually in connection with one Enoch, the Ethiopian Enoch, and the story of the angels who descended to earth, took wives from among human women, and produced the giant offspring known as the Nephilim. That story, that version of the Watchers, is probably the most famous angelic rebellion narrative in ancient literature. But here is what most people miss, and this is the detail I want you to hold carefully tonight, because it is the kind of detail that changes everything once you see it. In 2 Enoch, the Grigori are not simply the fallen watchers of one Enoch. They are a separate class, with a separate function and a separate story. Some of them are stationed in the first heaven, governing the natural world faithfully, doing exactly what they were assigned to do. And some of them are in the second heaven, but not governing, not working, not fulfilling any assignment at all. And what they are doing in the second heaven, we will come to very shortly. But first, I want to stay in the first heaven a little longer, because there is one more detail here that most summaries of 2 Enoch leave out entirely, and it is the detail that stopped me the first time I read this section carefully. When Enoch enters the first heaven, the angels there bow to him. Let that land for a moment. A human being, a man from earth, ascending through the layers of heaven, and the first citizens of that heaven greet him with reverence, not with suspicion, not with indifference, with a bow. No. Why does that matter? Because it tells us something about what 2 Enoch believes a human being actually is. In most religious imagination, even sincere and devout religious imagination, the human being is the lesser creature, the one who looks up, the one who approaches, the one who is permitted into sacred space by the grace of something greater. And all of that is true in one sense. But 2 Enoch is telling us something else alongside that truth. It is telling us that the arrival of a human being in heaven is not merely tolerated. It is acknowledged. It is greeted. It is met with a gesture that says, "You belong in this picture. You were expected. Your presence here is not a surprise to anyone who lives here." I have sat with that image longer than I expected to. Night traveler. Because I think many of us carry, somewhere beneath the surface of our religious lives, a quiet suspicion that we don't quite belong in the picture. That heaven is real, but real for other people, more faithful people, more certain people, people who have not carried what we have carried, or doubted what we have doubted, or grown as tired as we have grown. And then 2 Enoch shows you a human being walking into the first layer of heaven, and the angels bow, not because Enoch was perfect, not because he had no questions, but because he was a human being, ascending, and his arrival was considered worthy of welcome. Remember that image. We are going to need it again before this night is over. Now, there is one more thing I want to tell you about the first heaven before we move upward. And this comes not only from 2 Enoch, but from the broader tradition of texts that describe the same cosmological architecture. In the Hebrew tradition, the first heaven is sometimes called Vilon, V-I-L-O-N, from a root that carries the meaning of a curtain or a veil. The first heaven as a veil, the outermost layer, the one that separates ordinary, visible sky from everything that lies beyond it. And the tradition says that this veil is drawn closed every evening and opened again every morning. That the drawing of that veil is what produces the transition between day and night, between the light that fills the world and the darkness that rests it. Think about that for a moment. Every night that has ever fallen on this earth, every evening that has ever gathered the light back in and let the dark come forward, according to this tradition, was an act, a deliberate, gentle, purposeful act performed in the first heaven by beings assigned to that exact task. The night you are resting inside right now was prepared for you, not accidentally, not mechanically, by the first layer of heaven, drawing its veil as it has drawn it since before memory began. I think about that sometimes when I cannot sleep. I think about the veil being drawn. I think about the care involved in something so ordinary, being treated as a task worthy of angelic assignment. The night is not an absence. It is a preparation, and you are inside it right now, held by it, resting in something that was made, specifically with rest in mind. That is the first heaven, the layer closest to you, the threshold, the governed sky, the place where 200 angels tend the weather of your world, where the Grigori hold their watch, where the veil is drawn each evening with the same care it has always been drawn, and where a human being ascending was greeted, not with suspicion, but with a bow. Now we move upward to the second layer, and I need you to be prepared, night traveler, because the second heaven is not like the first. The first heaven felt like order, like governance, like the sky being tended by careful hands. The second heaven feels like something else entirely. It feels like a question, a very old question, one that heaven itself has not yet finished answering. And when Enoch enters it, what he sees there is something that no image of heaven I was ever given as a child, or as a young man, or as a pastor reading his Bible by lamplight late at night, ever prepared me for. In the second layer of heaven, there is darkness, and inside that darkness, there are faces, and those faces are weeping. Stay with me. The second heaven I want to take a moment before we enter it, because I think the way we approach this layer matters. Most people who have heard of 2 Enoch, most people who have encountered any summary of its contents online or in a book, know that the second heaven contains fallen angels. They know the headline, but the headline, as always, misses the detail that carries the actual weight. And the detail that carries the weight here is not what these beings did. It is where they are and what they are doing when Enoch finds them, and what happens between Enoch and these beings in the few verses the manuscript devotes to this encounter, because those few verses, read carefully, slowly, without hurry, contain a picture of heaven that is more honest, more complete, and more theologically serious than almost anything I have encountered in popular religious teaching. So let us go in slowly. Let us not rush past what is here. The second heaven. When Enoch arrives at its threshold, the text says, "The angels who are guiding him take him through the entrance, and the first thing that strikes him is the darkness. Not partial darkness, not the soft dimness of a room where the lamp has burned low. Complete darkness, the kind of darkness that is not simply the absence of light, but the presence of something, a weight, a heaviness, a darkness that has been there long enough to feel like a permanent condition rather than a temporary state. And inside that darkness, Enoch sees them." The text describes a great multitude of beings, standing or hanging, suspended in the dark of the second heaven. Their faces are turned downward, and they are weeping. Now, I want to stay with that image for a moment, because I think we move past it too quickly if we are not careful. These are not beings weeping on earth. They are not souls in some underground place of punishment. They are in heaven, inside the second layer of the same structure that contains paradise and archangels, and the throne of God somewhere above. They are inside heaven, in darkness, weeping. And the question that forces itself forward when you sit with that image long enough is this: what does it mean that heaven is willing to contain this? What does it say about the nature of divine order? That the same architecture which holds paradise in the third layer and the records of every human life in the sixth layer also holds in its second layer a darkness full of weeping faces. I think it says something most of us were never taught. It says that divine order does not pretend. It does not arrange things for appearances. It does not hide what is difficult in some place outside itself, where the discomfort of it cannot disturb the brightness of everything else. Divine order, according to 2 Enoch, holds everything: the glorious and the grieving, the praised and the punished, the singing and the silent, all of it within the same structure, all of it under the same governance, all of it waiting in its own way for what comes next. That is a more complete picture of heaven than most of us were given. And I think, if we're honest, it is also a more comforting one, because a heaven that holds only the perfect, only the resolved, only the already answered, is a heaven with very little room for the rest of us. But a heaven that holds darkness alongside light, grief alongside glory, waiting alongside arrival, that is a heaven large enough, honest enough, serious enough to be worth believing in. Now, let me tell you who these beings are. The text calls them the apostates. That word in the tradition behind 2 Enoch does not refer to human beings who lost their faith. It refers to angelic beings who turned away, who, at some point, before the world as we know it was complete, made a choice to move in a direction opposite to the one they were created for. And here is the detail that most summaries of this passage fail to emphasize. These are not the same beings as the Watchers in 1 Enoch. The Watchers in 1 Enoch, the ones associated with Mount Hermon, the ones who descended to earth and took wives from among human women. Those beings fell into a specific kind of rebellion rooted in desire. The beings in 2 Enoch's second heaven are different. Their rebellion, according to the tradition behind this text, happened earlier, before the Watchers descended, before the Nephilim were born, before the flood, before any of the events that fill the pages of Genesis. These are pre-creation rebels, beings who turned away, not from a world they were tempted by, but from an order they were simply unwilling to accept. And they have been in the second heaven ever since, not imprisoned in chains, not cast into an abyss, simply held in darkness, in the second layer, waiting for a judgment that has not yet fully arrived. Now, the scholar Andrei Orlov, who has devoted more careful attention to 2 Enoch than almost any other living researcher, has noted something about these beings that I find genuinely important. He observes that 2 Enoch's second heaven preserves a layer of Jewish angelology, a way of thinking about angelic rebellion and angelic consequence that does not appear in the standard biblical canon, and that does not appear in quite the same form in any other ancient Jewish or early Christian text. It is a tradition that seems to have been carried specifically by the stream of thought that produced 2 Enoch, which means that without this manuscript, without the Slavonic monks who kept copying it, without the medieval monasteries that stored it through centuries when no one outside their walls was paying attention to it, we would not know this picture existed. We would not know that ancient Jewish cosmological imagination held space for this kind of complexity inside heaven, for rebellion that predates creation, for darkness held inside the same structure as light, for weeping that has been going on longer than human history. Someone kept that picture alive, and tonight, because they did, we are standing inside it. Now I want to tell you about the moment in this passage that stopped me completely. The moment I put the page down and sat still for a long time. It is not the darkness that does it. It is not the weeping. It is what happens next. When Enoch sees these beings in the second heaven, when he takes in the darkness and the grief and the downward turned faces, he weeps. He weeps with them. A human being ascending through heaven stops at the second layer and weeps alongside the beings he finds imprisoned there. He does not judge them. He does not lecture them. He does not pass quickly through their layer on his way to something better. He stops and he weeps. And then the text says something even more remarkable. The beings in the darkness, these ancient rebels, these pre-creation apostates who have been in the second heaven since before the world learned to count its years, speak to Enoch, and what they ask him is to pray for them. Let that land for a moment. Night traveler. These ancient angelic beings, imprisoned in the darkness of the second heaven, ask a human being to intercede for them before God. They are asking Enoch to do something they apparently cannot do for themselves, to bring their case, their grief, their long darkness before the throne that exists somewhere above all 6 layers, and Enoch. This human being ascending through heaven, this man from earth, who started the night lying in his bed, just as you are lying in yours, agrees. He intercedes for them. He carries their request upward with him. Now, the text does not tell us directly what the result of that intercession was. There is a gap in the manuscript at that point, a place where the answer is either lost or deliberately withheld, or simply left open, in the way the oldest sacred texts sometimes leave the most important things open. But what the text does tell us is that the exchange happened, that a human being and ancient imprisoned angels met inside the 2nd layer of heaven, and something passed between them, a weeping, a request, a willingness to carry what someone else could not carry alone. I have thought about that exchange many times. I think about what it means that the text places a human being in that role, not an archangel, not a higher celestial being, a human standing in the darkness of the 2nd heaven, being asked to speak on behalf of those who could no longer speak for themselves. There is something in that detail that I find almost unbearably moving, because it suggests that the human voice, the human capacity for compassion, the human willingness to stop and weep alongside someone else's darkness, carries weight, even in heaven, even in the 2nd layer, even with beings older than the world. Even there, a human being who stops and weeps is considered someone worth asking for help. Now, I want to tell you about one more specific detail in the 2nd heaven, one more piece of the picture that most readings of this passage miss. The text describes the faces of these beings as turned downward. In the Slavonic manuscript, the phrase used for this carries a weight that most English translations soften. The word implies not simply that their heads are bowed, it implies a permanent orientation, a direction that has become their defining posture. Their faces are not temporarily lowered in shame or grief, the way a person lowers their face after a difficult conversation, and then lifts it again when the difficulty passes. Their faces are permanently oriented downward, away from the light above them, away from the heaven above their heaven, away from whatever exists in the layers above the 2nd. And I think that detail is the most theologically precise thing in the entire passage, because it says that what holds these beings in darkness is not primarily a chain. It is not primarily a lock. It is a direction, a chosen orientation, a persistent turning away from the light that is still there, still present, still available. Somewhere above them, their prison is not constructed of walls. It is constructed of the direction their faces have been pointing for longer than human history has been counting. I find that thought deeply, quietly instructive, not only about ancient angelic cosmology, but about the nature of darkness itself. Darkness, in this tradition, is not always imposed from outside. Sometimes, darkness is the accumulated weight of a direction chosen and maintained long past the point where changing direction would have been easy. That is the 2nd heaven. Darkness inside the structure of heaven itself. Weeping that has been going on since before the world began. Ancient beings asking a human to carry their case upward, and faces permanently turned away from a light that has never, in all that time, stopped being there. Now we move to the 3rd layer, and when we do, the atmosphere changes completely, because above the 2nd heaven, above the darkness and the weeping and the downward turned faces, there is a garden, and that garden, night, traveler, is described in 2 Enoch in more specific, more sensory, more architecturally detailed language than any other description of paradise in the entire ancient world, more specific than Genesis, more detailed than Revelation, more sensory than anything in the Psalms. A garden with rivers, with trees, with a fragrance the text says no human tongue has words for, with angels who tend it continuously, waiting for the ones who were always meant to walk in it. But there is something else in the third heaven, something that sits on the other side of that garden that almost no one who retells this story ever mentions. And that something changes the entire picture of what the third layer holds. Stay with me, the third heaven. Before I tell you what 2 Enoch says Enoch saw here, I want to tell you something about the word itself. The word paradise. Most people who use that word today use it casually. A paradise vacation. A paradise view. A paradise somewhere warm and beautiful and far from the difficulties of ordinary life. But the word has a history, and that history changes what we are walking into right now. The word paradise comes from an old Persian word, paradisa. P-A-I-R-I-D-A-I-Z-A. It means a walled garden, an enclosed space, a cultivated place, deliberately bounded, specifically tended, carefully maintained. Not a wild beauty, a governed beauty. A beauty that exists because someone decided it should exist and then arranged everything inside it with intention. That word traveled from Old Persian into Hebrew, into Greek, into Aramaic, into the languages of the ancient world. And when it arrived in those languages, it carried all of that original meaning with it. A walled garden, an enclosed cultivated place, something tended, something bounded, something that does not happen by accident. So when Jesus, on the cross, turns to the man dying beside him and says, "Today you will be with me in paradise," the people who heard that word in that moment would not have heard a vague promise about somewhere nice. They would have heard a specific location, a specific layer, a specific place that texts like 2 Enoch had already described in detail, with named rivers, named trees, named angels, named fragrances. They would have heard the third heaven, and they would have known, at least in outline, what that meant. Tonight, I want to give you back that specificity. I want to return the word paradise to what it always pointed toward. Not a vague brightness, not a comfortable nowhere, but a specific, carefully described, 3,000-year-old picture of exactly what is waiting in the third layer. Let us go in. When Enoch enters the third heaven, the text of 2 Enoch becomes suddenly, almost overwhelmingly, sensory. Everything before this point has been described with a certain architectural clarity. The first heaven felt organized. The second heaven felt heavy. But the third heaven feels alive. The first thing Enoch notices is the fragrance. The text says it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Not simply pleasant, not simply beautiful, something for which his experience had no category. A fragrance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the trees, from the ground, from the air itself, as though the atmosphere of the third heaven was itself a kind of flowering. and then he sees the trees. The text describes trees unlike any that grow on earth, trees of impossible beauty, trees bearing every fruit, trees in perpetual bloom, perpetual fruit, perpetual abundance, without any season of dormancy, without any autumn stripping the leaves, without any winter silencing the branches, only perpetual, quiet, unbroken flourishing. And among those trees, at the center of the garden, is the tree of life. Now, in Genesis, the tree of life appears briefly. It is named. It is present in the Garden of Eden. And then, after the fall, it is guarded, sealed off, placed behind the cherubim with the flaming sword, and it disappears from the narrative. It does not reappear in the standard biblical canon until the very last pages of Revelation, where it appears again in the new creation, bearing 12 kinds of fruit. Its leaves for the healing of the nations. But between Genesis and Revelation, the tree of life is mostly silent in the standard text. 2 Enoch does not let it stay silent. In the third heaven, Enoch sees it, alive, present, tended, not guarded against access in the way Genesis implies after the fall, but cared for, maintained, waited over by angels whose specific assignment is to tend this garden and to keep it ready for the ones the text says are destined to walk in it. I want to pause on that word for a moment. Ready. The garden in the third heaven is not sitting idle. It is not abandoned between visits. It is actively tended, continuously maintained. The angels there are not waiting for something to do. They are already doing it, pruning what needs pruning, tending what needs tending, keeping the fragrance in the air, keeping the fruit on the branches, keeping the place in the exact condition it needs to be in. For whoever comes next, there is something in that image, night traveler, that I find extraordinarily comforting. The idea that paradise is not a place that has been left to wait and neglect, not a promise made and then forgotten while history plays out below, but a place that is right now, tonight, while you are lying here, listening, being tended, being kept ready by beings whose only assignment is to make sure it is exactly what it is supposed to be when the time comes for it to be entered. That is not a small thought. That is one of the most quietly steadying pictures ancient literature has preserved, and it lives in a manuscript most people have never been offered. Now, let me tell you about the rivers, because 2 Enoch's description of paradise includes 4 rivers flowing through the garden, and the specific substances those rivers carry is one of the details that most retellings of this passage either simplify or leave out entirely. The text says the rivers of paradise carry honey and milk and oil and wine. 4 rivers, 4 substances, each one carrying a specific resonance in the ancient world that goes far beyond simple abundance. Honey in the ancient world was the food of wisdom, of sacred words, of things that were both sweet and medicinal. Milk was the food of new life, of nourishment given before the recipient was strong enough to seek nourishment for themselves, of a care that precedes appetite. Oil was the substance of consecration, of anointing, of the moment when an ordinary thing is set apart for a sacred purpose. And wine was the substance of covenant, of shared table, of celebration that marks the arrival of something promised. 4 rivers: wisdom, nourishment, consecration, covenant, flowing through a garden tended by angels around a tree of life that has never stopped bearing fruit in the third layer of a six-layered heaven, preserved in a Slavonic manuscript, copied by monks who believed this picture was worth keeping. I think they were right. Now, I promised you at the beginning of this section that there was something else in the third heaven, something that almost no one who retells this story mentions, something on the other side of the garden, and I want to tell you about it now, not to disturb the beauty of what we have just walked through, but because leaving it out would be a kind of dishonesty. And these manuscripts deserve honesty more than they deserve comfort. When Enoch is shown the third heaven, he is shown the garden on what the text calls the eastern and southern sides. Paradise, the tree, the rivers, the fragrance, the tended abundance. And then the angels who are guiding him show him the other side, the northern side of the third heaven. And what is there is not a garden. The text describes a place of darkness, of fire, of instruments of punishment, a place where the text says the souls of the wicked are kept, waiting for their judgment. Now, I want to be very careful here, because this is the part of 2 Enoch's third heaven that is easiest to misread in either direction. Some readers encounter this detail and become fascinated by the punishment imagery. They catalog the instruments. They dramatize the darkness. They turn this into something lurid, and that is not what the text is doing. Other readers encounter this detail and become uncomfortable. They want to soften it, explain it away, fit it into a more palatable modern framework, and that is not faithful to the text either. What the text is doing is something more serious than either of those responses. It is showing us a heaven that holds both, that does not separate mercy and judgment into different cosmic addresses, but places them in the same layer, on different sides of the same heaven. And I think the reason for that, the reason this picture places paradise and its shadow in the same third layer, is deeply intentional, because it says something about what divine order actually is. Divine order, in this tradition, is not a system that sends the good to one place and the bad to another place, and then never has to think about either of them again. Divine order holds both. It keeps both within its governance. It maintains both within the same structure, and by doing so, it says something about the seriousness of both. Paradise is not simply the default. It is something specific, something earned, something that exists alongside its alternative, which makes it more precious, not less. And the alternative is not simply chaos or nothingness. It is also within divine order, also governed, also held, also waiting for what comes next. Now, why does the text associate the northern side with the place of punishment? That is not a random detail. In ancient Hebrew cosmological imagination, the north carried a specific symbolic weight. The north was associated with opposition, with the place from which adversaries come, with a direction that stands in contrast to the warmth and light of the south and east. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible frequently describe judgment and invasion and divine confrontation as coming from the north. Jeremiah hears the word of the Lord and sees disaster coming from the north. Ezekiel's great visions of divine judgment are oriented northward. Isaiah speaks of the adversary who sets his throne in the north as the direction of pride and opposition to divine order. So, when 2 Enoch places the shadow of the third heaven on the northern side, it is not being geographically literal. It is speaking in the symbolic language of ancient cosmology, North means opposition. North means that which stands against the direction of life and warmth and divine order. And in the third heaven, that opposition is held, contained, governed, not triumphant, not escaped, not loose in the world causing uncontrolled damage, held within the structure, within the governance, within the third layer of a heaven that is large enough, serious enough, honest enough to contain everything that exists without pretending any of it away. I find that genuinely comforting. Not comfortable. Comforting. There is a difference. Comfortable means the difficult things have been removed. Comforting means the difficult things are held by something strong enough to hold them. To Enoch's third heaven is not comfortable, but it is comforting because it shows a divine order that does not flinch, that does not look away, that does not pretend the northern side does not exist, but governs it, holds it, keeps it within the same structure as the garden and the rivers and the tree of life, and calls all of it heaven. That is the third heaven, paradise, on the eastern side. 4 rivers carrying wisdom and nourishment and consecration and covenant. A tree of life tended by angels who have been keeping it ready for longer than history has been counting. And on the northern side, the shadow, both within the same layer, both under the same governance, both part of the same honest, complete, unflinching picture of what heaven actually holds. Now we move upward again, past paradise, past its shadow, into the 4th layer, and when we arrive there, the atmosphere changes once more, because the 4th heaven is where cosmic time lives, where the sun travels, where the moon makes her measured journey, and what 2 Enoch says about how those journeys are made, and who accompanies the sun and moon as they travel, and what their movement actually means in the language of ancient sacred cosmology, answers a question, night traveler, that the Book of Genesis raises, and never quite finishes answering. Before we go any further into these layers, before we climb past paradise, past the shadow on the northern side, past everything the third heaven holds, I want to stop and be honest with you, the way I was honest at the beginning of this night, because I think this is the right place for it, right here, halfway through 6 layers of heaven, in the space between the 3rd layer and the 4th. I study these manuscripts. Night traveler. I sit with them late. I read them slowly. I return to them when the world has gone quiet and there is nothing between me and the page. And most nights, that study brings me something I can only describe as a quiet fullness, a sense of being inside something larger than ordinary life, a sense that the ancient voices in these texts are still speaking, still carrying something real, still pointing towards something true. But there are other nights when I close the manuscript and sit in the dark and feel the distance between what I have been reading and where I actually am. 6 layers of heaven, angels governing the weather, paradise tended and waiting, the tree of life still bearing fruit, records kept in the 6th layer by a named archangel who forgets nothing, and me, sitting in an ordinary room, carrying ordinary weight, wondering whether any of that magnificent architecture has a specific place. For someone as small as I am, maybe you know that feeling. Not doubt exactly, something quieter than doubt, the ache of feeling too small, to be remembered by something so vast, the ache of wondering whether the distance between here and the 6th layer where the records are kept is a distance that actually includes you. I want to tell you something, not as theology, as something I have come to believe, slowly, through years of sitting with these old texts in the dark. The reason these manuscripts were written down, the reason they were copied and stored and carried forward through centuries of indifference and neglect, was not for the comfortable. It was not for the certain. It was not for the people who already felt large enough and close enough and remembered enough. It was for the ones lying awake at night, wondering, aching, feeling the distance. It was for you and for me, and perhaps that is exactly why the sixth layer, the one we are still climbing toward, is specifically, deliberately, architecturally, a place of remembering. Not remembering in the vague sense of being somewhere in God's general awareness. Remembering in the specific sense, named, recorded, kept by a being whose entire existence, whose entire assignment in the sixth heaven is to make sure that nothing and no one is lost. We are going there. Hold on just a little longer. Night traveler, the fourth layer is waiting, and what it holds is worth the climb. The fourth heaven. I want to begin here with a question that has stayed with me for a long time, longer than I expected it to. When Genesis describes the creation of the sun and moon, it uses language that is surprisingly restrained. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. That is almost everything Genesis gives us about two of the most significant objects in the created universe. Two great lights. One governs the day, one governs the night. He also made the stars, as though the stars were almost an afterthought, as though the writer had something much larger in mind, and the physical description was never really the point. And for years, every time I read that passage, I felt the restraint of it, the sense that something was being held back, that the full picture was not being given, that the sun and moon were not simply two lights hung in the sky by an efficient creator who moved on quickly to other business, but that they were something more specific, something more populated, something more governed. And then I came to the fourth heaven in 2 Enoch, and the restraint of Genesis suddenly made sense, because what 2 Enoch describes in the fourth layer, what it says about how the sun and moon travel, and who accompanies them, and what their journeys actually mean, is not a detail that fits easily into a single sentence. It is a picture, a full, specific, populated, ancient picture that has been waiting in this manuscript for someone to slow down enough to look at it properly. Let us look at it properly tonight. When Enoch enters the fourth heaven, the first thing the text describes is movement, not stillness, not architecture in the way the earlier layers felt architectural. Movement. The fourth heaven is in motion. It is the layer of cosmic time, the layer where the great mechanisms of day and night, of season and cycle, of the measured movement that makes human life possible on earth below, are not merely operating, they are being operated. There is a difference. A mechanism operates by itself. Something being operated has someone operating it. And in the fourth heaven, the ones doing the operating are angels, thousands of them. Now let me tell you what 2 Enoch says about the sun specifically, because this is where the text becomes almost breathtaking in its detail. The sun, in 2 Enoch's fourth heaven, does not simply move across the sky. It travels in a chariot, and that chariot is drawn by and escorted by and surrounded by a vast company of angels. The text describes the sun's face. The sun in this tradition is not a ball of fire moving through empty space. It is a created being with a face, with a crown of fire on that face, with 6 wings, and with an escort of thousands of angels accompanying its daily crossing from the eastern gate of heaven to the western gate, every morning when the light comes, every afternoon when the shadows lengthen, every evening when the sun descends below the horizon. According to 2 Enoch, that movement is not the motion of a star following orbital mechanics. It is a procession, a daily, deliberate, escorted procession through the 4th layer of heaven, accompanied by beings whose specific assignment is to accompany it, to make sure the light arrives every single day, without fail, without absence, without a single morning where the east does not eventually brighten, because the procession has not been maintained. I want to stay with that image for a moment, because I think it changes something. I think it changes the feeling of sunrise. Most of us have grown up experiencing sunrise as a natural phenomenon, as the earth rotating on its axis, as physics producing light at predictable intervals. And all of that is true, but 2 Enoch is speaking a different language, the language of intentionality, the language of a creation that does not simply function, but is served, attended, escorted. Every morning light that has ever fallen on your face when you woke up, every dawn that has ever arrived after a night that felt too long, every sunrise that has ever found you still here, still breathing, still present in this world, according to the 4th heaven of 2 Enoch, was sent, was escorted to you by beings who have been making that same journey every single day since before the first human being opened their eyes to watch it arrive. Now, let me tell you about a specific name that appears in connection with the 4th heaven, not from 2 Enoch alone, but from the broader tradition of texts that describe the same cosmological architecture, a name found in 3 Enoch, the Hebrew Apocalypse, also known as the Sefer Hechalot, the Book of the Palaces. This text, which preserves a detailed Hebrew account of the heavenly hierarchy, names the angel assigned to the sun's eastern gate. His name is Peruel, P-U-R-U-E-L. In the Hebrew tradition behind this name, the root carries the meaning of fire of God, the angel of divine fire, the one stationed at the place where the sun begins its daily crossing, where the light is released each morning into the world below. Peruel, a name that appears in the Sefer Hechalot, the Book of the Palaces, a text connected to the ancient Jewish tradition of Merkabah mysticism. Merkabah, M-E-R-K-A-B-A-H. The word means chariot, and Merkabah mysticism was the ancient Jewish practice of contemplating the heavenly chariot, the divine throne, the structure of the heavens above, as a form of sacred devotion, not as curiosity, not as speculation, as prayer, as worship, as the deepest form of attention a human being could offer to the reality of what existed above them. The Sefer Hechalot, the Book of the Palaces, is one of the central texts of that tradition, and it names Puruel, the angel of the Eastern Gate, the one who stands where morning begins. I have read that name many times now, and every time I read it, I think about what it means that morning has a guardian, that the place where light enters the world is not an unattended opening, but a gate with a name above it, and a being stationed at it, whose assignment is to make sure the light comes through every single day, without exception. There is a verse in the Psalms, Night Traveler, that I have read many times over the years. The sun knows when to go down. That is from Psalm 104. The sun knows when to go down. I always understood that as poetry, as the psalmist's way of saying that creation is ordered, that the movements of the sky are reliable, that God has arranged things well, and all of that is true. But after sitting with 2 Enoch's fourth heaven, after reading about Puruel at the Eastern Gate, after encountering the picture of the sun as a created being with a face and a crown and an escort of thousands, I read that verse differently now. The sun knows when to go down, not as metaphor, as description. The sun knows, because in this tradition, the sun is not a mechanism that follows a programmed schedule. It is a creature, created, governed, obedient, knowing what it was made for, and doing it every day, without complaint, without variation, without a single morning where it decided not to rise, or a single evening where it refused to set. That kind of faithfulness, that kind of daily obedience to one's created purpose, is something I find genuinely moving, not because it flatters human laziness, but because it shows what faithfulness looks like when it is practiced without audience, without applause, without anyone particularly noticing. The sun does not rise to be admired. It rises because it was made to rise. And Puruel stands at the gate, and the escort assembles, and the procession moves, and the light comes every single day without fail. Now let me tell you about the moon. Because the fourth heaven governs not only the sun, but the moon, and 2 Enoch's description of the moon's journey is equally specific and equally remarkable. The moon in 2 Enoch does not simply wax and wane according to orbital mechanics. It has chambers. The text describes the moon as traveling through specific chambers in the fourth heaven, each chamber corresponding to a phase of the lunar cycle. New moon, waxing crescent. First quarter, waxing gibbous. Full moon, waning gibbous. Last quarter, waning crescent. Each phase in this tradition corresponds to the moon entering a different chamber of the fourth heaven, a different room, a different station in its monthly journey. And like the sun, the moon does not make this journey alone. It too has an escort, beings assigned to accompany its movement, to govern its light, to measure its phases, to make sure that the rhythm of the lunar cycle, which ancient peoples used to mark time, to plan harvests, to calculate sacred feasts, to order the months of the year, never breaks, never falls out of its pattern, never loses its count. Now, why does this matter? Why does it matter that the moon has chambers, and the sun has an escort, and Puruel stands at the Eastern Gate? It matters because of what it says about sacred time. In the ancient world, particularly in the Jewish tradition from which 2 Enoch emerges, time was not simply a neutral container. Time was covenantal, sacred, morally charged. The Sabbath was not simply a day of rest, because rest is pleasant. It was a day of rest, because the structure of time itself had been ordered by God to include it. The feasts were not simply annual celebrations, because celebration is good. They were sacred appointments, moments when the movement of time intersected with the purposes of God, marked by the same sun and moon that the fourth heaven was governing. So when 2 Enoch tells us that the fourth layer governs the sun and moon, and that their movements are escorted and maintained by angelic beings, it is saying something about the sacredness of time itself. It is saying that every Sabbath that has ever been kept, every feast that has ever been celebrated, every new moon that has ever marked the beginning of a sacred month was made possible by the fourth heaven doing its work, by Puruel standing at the gate, by the escort assembling, by the chambers of the moon cycling through their pattern, faithfully, without pause, without error, since the beginning of counted time. I have thought about that many times. I think about it especially on evenings like this one, when the day has been long, and the night has finally arrived, and the darkness outside is the darkness of a world that has been through its daily procession and arrived here, at rest, at this hour, with you lying still, and the fourth heaven having done what it always does, drawn the day closed, and opened the night, and set the moon in its chamber, and placed the stars in their assigned positions, all so that this moment, this specific quiet moment, could exist. The night was not an accident. It was a preparation, governed by the fourth layer, escorted by beings whose names are written in texts 3,000 years old, and arriving here, at you, exactly on time, as it always has, as it always will. Now we move upward, past the sun's procession, past the moon's chambers, past Puruel at the eastern gate, into the fifth layer, and I need to prepare you for what we find there, because the fifth heaven of all 6 layers is the one that has stayed with me longest, not because of what it contains, but because of what it does not contain. What is missing from the fifth heaven? What has been deliberately, consciously, permanently removed from it by the beings who live there is a sound, a specific sound, a sound that every other layer of heaven produces continuously, and its absence, its chosen, deliberate, heartbreaking absence, is described in 2 Enoch with a single phrase that I have not been able to leave behind since the first night I read it. Stay close. Night traveler. The fifth heaven is waiting, and its silence has something to say. The fifth heaven. Before I tell you what Enoch finds here, I want to tell you about a sound, a specific sound, because understanding what is missing from the fifth heaven requires first understanding what is present in every other layer. In the ancient Jewish tradition that produced 2 Enoch, and the Sefer Hechalot, and the broader world of Merkabah mysticism, heaven is not silent. Heaven is not the quiet, peaceful, softly lit stillness that most modern religious imagination pictures. Heaven is loud, not loud in the way of confusion or chaos, loud in the way of continuous, organized, ancient, never-stopping praise. The tradition has a specific word for this, Kedusha, Q-E-D-U-C-H-A-H. It means holiness. But in the context of the heavenly tradition, it refers specifically to the threefold declaration that the prophet Isaiah heard the seraphim singing before the divine throne. Holy, holy, holy. Those 3 words, repeated continuously by the beings of heaven in what the tradition describes as an unbroken song. Not a song sung occasionally, not a song sung on special occasions, a song that has never stopped, a song that was already ancient when Isaiah heard it, a song that was old when the world was young, and according to the Sefer Hechalot, according to the tradition of Merkabah mysticism that mapped the structure of heaven in extraordinary detail, this song is the organizing sound of heaven itself. It is not background music. It is not decorative. It is structural, the way the frame of a building gives the building its shape. The Kedusha gives heaven its shape. The continuous praise of the holy beings before the throne is what makes heaven, heaven, and every layer, from the first to the 6th, participates in it. Every angel in the 1st heaven tending the weather, every being in the 3rd heaven tending the garden, every escort accompanying the sun's procession in the 4th heaven, every archangel in the 6th heaven maintaining the records, all of them, as they work, as they govern, as they tend and escort and record us singing continuously. The Kedusha is never absent from any layer of heaven, except one, the 5th. When Enoch enters the 5th heaven, the first thing he notices is not darkness. It is not weeping. It is not fire or punishment or any dramatic visual spectacle. It is the absence of the song. The 5th heaven is silent, not the silence of emptiness, not the silence of a place where nothing lives. The silence of a place that is full of beings who have stopped singing. Let me tell you what Enoch sees when he looks at them. The text describes an enormous multitude, countless faces, beings of great stature, standing in the 5th heaven, and their faces are downcast, not in the way of the beings in the 2nd heaven, whose faces were permanently oriented away from the light. These faces are downcast in a different way, in the way of beings who know exactly what they are not doing, in the way of beings who remember the song and have chosen not to sing it. These are the Grigori, the same class of angelic beings introduced in the 1st heaven. But these are not the ones who remained faithful. These are the ones who fell, and what they fell from, according to this tradition, was not primarily an action. It was a posture, a turning, a stopping. They stopped singing the Kedusha, and in stopping, they stepped outside the organizing sound of heaven, outside the structure, outside the continuous praise that makes heaven what it is, and they have been standing in that stopped silence ever since. No, I want to be careful here, because this is the detail that most retellings of the 5th heaven miss entirely. When people describe the fallen Grigori, they almost always focus on what they did, the descent, the transgression, the forbidden instruction, the rebellion in its active form. But to Enoch's 5th heaven is not primarily about what they did. It is about what they stopped. And the difference between those two framings is enormous, because it says that the deepest nature of their fall, the thing that most precisely describes what went wrong, was not a dramatic act of rebellion. It was a withdrawal from worship, a silence where there should have been singing, an absence where there should have been presence, a stopping where everything else continues. And I find that picture, Night Traveler, more instructive than almost any other image in these 6 layers, because it says something about what sin actually is at its deepest level. Not merely the breaking of rules, not merely the crossing of boundaries, but the withdrawal of the voice that was made to praise, the silencing of what was created to sing, the stepping outside of the continuous participation in something larger than oneself that gives existence its proper shape. I think about that image in quiet moments. What would it feel like to know the song and stop singing it? Not because you forgot the words, not because you lost your voice, but because something changed inside you, and the song no longer felt like yours to sing, and then to stand in the silence of that, stopped singing, for longer than human history has been counting, knowing the song is still going on everywhere around you, in every other layer, in every other being, and feeling the weight of being the only silence inside a universe of continuous praise. That is the fifth heaven. That is the Grigori. That is what their downcast faces are carrying. Now, let me tell you about the specific term 2 Enoch uses for what the Grigori have abandoned, because this is the nig detail of this layer, the hidden, specific, the thing most readings pass over. In the Slavonic text, the phrase associated with what the Grigori have withdrawn from connects directly to the concept of the eternal liturgy, the unceasing praise, the continuous kedusha. The scholars who work most closely with this tradition, including Philip Alexander, who has spent decades studying the relationship between 2 Enoch, 3 Enoch, and the broader Hecalot literature, have noted that the liturgical function of angelic beings is not peripheral to these texts. It is central. In Second Temple Jewish cosmology, the being that praises is the being that belongs. Participation in the Kedusha is not an optional addition to heavenly existence. It is the defining act of heavenly existence. To be a heavenly being is to praise continuously, without ceasing, without variation, without the silence of withdrawal. And so when the Grigori stop, they do not merely commit an act of rebellion. They step outside the definition of what they were. They become, in a specific and terrible sense, something heaven does not have a category for. Beings who know the song and will not sing it, standing in the silence of that refusal, in the fifth layer, while everything above and below them continues. Now, I want to tell you what happens when Enoch encounters them, because what Enoch does in the fifth heaven is one of the most remarkable moments in the entire manuscript. He speaks to them, this human being, ascending through the layers, already having wept with the imprisoned angels in the second heaven, already having stood in the Garden of Paradise in the third, already having passed through the procession of the sun and moon in the fourth, arrives in the fifth heaven, and he speaks to the silent Grigori. And what he says to them is this: why have you not performed your worship before the face of God? Why have you withheld your praise? Why are your faces downcast? Why do you not serve before the face of the Lord? And then, after asking those questions, Enoch does something even more remarkable. He calls them back. He encourages them to return to the Kedusha. He tells them, this human being ascending through heaven tells these ancient fallen angelic beings that it is not too late to sing. And the text says that some of them lift their faces. Let me say that again. Some of them lift their faces. Not all. Some, but some. After however long they have been standing in the silence of the fifth heaven, a human voice arrives and asks them why they have stopped singing and calls them back to what they were made for. And some of them lift their faces. I have sat with that image for a very long time, night traveler. I am not sure I have fully finished sitting with it, because It says something I was not taught in any church, any seminary, any theological classroom I ever sat in. It says that the human voice, the human capacity to call something back toward its proper purpose, carries weight, even in the fifth heaven, even with beings older than the world, even with fallen angels who have been standing in self-chosen silence for longer than history has been written. A human being arrives and asks the question, "Why have you stopped singing?" And some of them remember. Some of them lift their faces toward the sound they have been refusing, toward the praise they were made to participate in, toward the kedusha that has been going on without them in every other layer since the beginning. No, the text is ambiguous about what happens next. It does not tell us clearly whether the Grigori who lift their faces return fully to the kedusha. It does not give us a resolution that ties everything neatly. It leaves the moment open, in the way the oldest sacred texts leave the most important moments open, not because the writers did not know what happened, but because some moments are too large for conclusion. Some moments need to remain open, so that the reader can stand inside them and feel their full weight, without the premature comfort of a tidy ending. And perhaps that is exactly right, because the question Enoch asks the silent Grigori, "Why have you stopped singing?" is not only a question for ancient fallen angels in the fifth layer of heaven. It is a question for anyone who was made to praise and has grown quiet. Anyone who once knew what they were for and has spent a long time not doing it. Anyone whose face has been downcast long enough that lifting it again feels almost impossible. Almost. Not quite. Because some of them lifted their faces, and that some is enough. That some is more than enough. That some is one of the most quietly hopeful details in 3,000 years of sacred literature. Now, there is one more thing I want to tell you about the fifth heaven before we move upward to the sixth, and it concerns the way 2 Enoch describes the Grigori's silence in relation to the rest of heaven. The text makes clear that the silence of the fifth layer, the stopped singing of the Grigori, does not stop the kedusha. It does not interrupt it. It does not create a gap in the continuous praise of heaven that weakens the whole structure. The song goes on. In every other layer, the first heaven sings as it tends the weather. The third heaven sings as it tends the garden. The fourth heaven sings as it escorts the sun and measures the moon. The sixth heaven sings as it keeps the records. The kedusha continues, unbroken, despite the silence in the fifth layer. And I think that detail matters more than it first appears, because it says that the withdrawal of some voices does not silence the song. It says that the kedusha is larger than the refusal of any particular being to participate in it. It says that praise continues, even when some of those who were made to praise have chosen not to. And perhaps, night traveler, that is one of the most important things the fifth heaven has to teach, not only about fallen angels, about the nature of divine praise itself. It cannot be stopped by withdrawal. It cannot be diminished by absence. It does not require unanimous participation to remain fully itself. It simply continues, holy, 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 in every layer where voices are still lifted, around and above and below the silence of the fifth, carrying on, as it always has, as it always will, until the day when perhaps even the Grigori lift their faces again and join. Now, we move to the sixth layer, the last layer 2 Enoch describes in detail. The layer I have been building towards since the beginning of this night, since the vulnerability I shared with you at the opening. since the ache I described, a feeling too small to be remembered by something so vast. The sixth heaven is the answer to that ache, not a vague answer, not a theological abstraction, a specific, named, architecturally precise answer, with an archangel assigned to it, whose name appears nowhere else in the ancient world, whose entire existence, whose entire assignment, whose entire reason for being in the sixth layer of heaven is to make sure that you are not forgotten. Stay with me, night traveler. We are almost there. The sixth heaven. I want to begin here with something simple, something so simple that it is easy to pass over. And yet, when I first truly stopped and felt its weight, it changed the way I read everything that came before it in this manuscript. It changed the way I read the first heaven, the second heaven, the third, the fourth, the fifth. It changed the way I understood what all six layers together are actually doing. The simple thing is this. In 2 Enoch, the sixth heaven contains archangels. Most people who have any familiarity with ancient religious texts would not find that surprising. Of course, heaven contains archangels. Of course, the higher layers contain beings of greater authority and greater proximity to the divine throne. That is expected. That is assumed. What is not assumed, what is not expected, what most people would never guess about the sixth heaven of 2 Enoch is what these archangels are doing. They are not fighting. They are not guarding. They are not governing celestial phenomena. They are not escorting the sun. They are not tending a garden. They are not maintaining sacred time. They are writing the sixth heaven. According to 2 Enoch, is an archive, a vast, carefully organized, continuously maintained cosmic archive, and the archangels who inhabit it are its scribes. They are keeping records. Records of what? Records of everything. The text is specific about this. 2 Enoch describes 7 groups of archangels in the sixth heaven, each group with its own specific area of record keeping. Some record the movements of the stars. Some record the orders of nature. Some record the cycles of the seasons. Some record the years and the months and the days. Some record the rivers and the seas. Some record the conduct of human beings. And some keep the records of records, maintaining the archive of everything that has ever been written down in the sixth layer, so that nothing is lost. Nothing is misplaced. Nothing slips through. Nothing is overlooked. Nothing is forgotten. Let me stay with that for a moment, because I think we move past it too quickly if we treat it as merely a colorful ancient detail. An archive is not a passive thing. An archive is an act of love. To build an archive is to say, this matters enough to keep. To maintain an archive is to say, this matters enough to protect. To assign archangels to an archive in the sixth layer of heaven, in the tradition of 2 Enoch, is to say, at the highest possible level of emphasis, that what is recorded here is considered by divine order worth keeping, worth protecting, worth assigning the most senior beings in the heavenly hierarchy to maintain. And among those records, among the movements of stars and the cycles of seasons and the ordering of rivers and seas, are the records of human lives. Your life, my life, the life of every human being who has ever drawn breath on this earth, kept in the sixth heaven by archangels, whose assignment is to make sure that not one detail is lost. Now, I want to tell you about the name I mentioned at the very beginning of this night. The name I said appeared nowhere else in the entire ancient world. Not in the Standard Bible. Not in 1 Enoch. Not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not in the Book of Jubilees. Not in any other preserved manuscript from the ancient Jewish or early Christian world. The name found exclusively, uniquely, only in 2 Enoch. The name is Pravuil. P-R-A-V-U-I-L. Pravuil. He is described in 2 Enoch as the keeper of the heavenly records, the archangel assigned specifically to the archive of the 6th heaven. And the text says something about him, night traveler, that I want you to hear carefully. It says that Pravuil is wiser than all the other archangels, wiser than all the other archangels, in a heaven already populated by beings of extraordinary intelligence and ancient knowledge. The one assigned to keep the records is described as the wisest of them all. Think about what that says about the act of record-keeping itself. In the tradition of 2 Enoch, wisdom is not primarily associated with power. It is not associated with fighting. It is not associated with governing the weather or escorting the sun or tending the garden. Wisdom, at its highest expression, is associated with remembering, with keeping, with making sure nothing is lost. The wisest being in the 6th heaven is the one who writes things down and keeps them forever. Now, the name Pravuil does not appear in any other ancient source. Scholars who have studied 2 Enoch carefully, including Andrei Orlov, have noted this uniqueness. The name appears to derive from a Slavonic rendering of an earlier Semitic original. Some scholars connect its root to meanings related to justice of God, or recorder before God, or one who stands in the presence of God as witness. The exact etymology is debated. What is not debated is that this name, this specific being, this wisest of archangels assigned to the records of the 6th heaven, survives in all of ancient literature in exactly one place. 2 Enoch, the Slavonic Apocalypse, the manuscript copied by medieval monks in Eastern European monasteries, who apparently understood, without needing anyone to explain it to them, that a text preserving the name of the archangel who keeps heaven's records was worth copying, worth storing, worth handing forward to whatever century needed it next. Now, I want to tell you what Pravuil does when Enoch arrives in the 6th heaven, because it is not what you might expect. Enoch arrives, and Pravuil, the wisest of archangels, the keeper of the heavenly records, gives Enoch the books. The text says that Pravuil brought out the books of the heavenly records and gave them to Enoch. 30 books, 30 volumes of heavenly knowledge placed into the hands of a human being. And then Pravuil does something even more remarkable. He dictates. He sits with Enoch in the 6th heaven, and he dictates to him. He tells Enoch everything that is written in the heavenly records, everything the archive contains, the movements of the stars, the ordering of time, the nature of creation, the record of human conduct, all of it, dictated by the wisest archangel to a human being sitting in the 6th layer of heaven, writing it down. And then Pravuil sends Enoch back through the 6 layers, back to earth, back to his family, back to the ordinary world, carrying 30 books of heavenly knowledge given to him by the archangel whose name appears nowhere else, in the wisest layer of a 6-layered heaven. Now, I want to connect this to something, to a text that exists in a completely different tradition, a completely different language, a completely different part of the ancient world, and yet describes something remarkably similar, The Ascension of Isaiah. This is an ancient text preserved in Ethiopic, Latin, Greek, and Slavonic, believed by most scholars to have been composed somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. It describes the prophet Isaiah ascending through multiple heavens, and what Isaiah finds as he goes higher mirrors in extraordinary ways what Enoch finds in 2 Enoch. In the Ascension of Isaiah, the higher heavens are populated by beings of increasing glory, increasing praise, increasing proximity to the divine throne. And as Isaiah moves through the layers, the praise grows louder. The Quedusha becomes more intense. The light becomes more complete. The record of what exists becomes more specific. And in the 6th layer of the Ascension of Isaiah, Isaiah sees beings whose glory is so great, whose praise is so complete, whose record-keeping is so total that he can barely stand in their presence. 2 ancient texts from different traditions, in different languages, preserved by different communities, both describing a 6th heaven, both describing a layer of extraordinary glory, extraordinary wisdom, extraordinary completeness, and both pointing toward the same essential truth, that the highest layer of describable heaven, the layer closest to the throne, the layer where the wisest beings are stationed, is a place of keeping, of recording, of making sure nothing is lost. That is not a coincidence. That is a convergence. 2 ancient traditions arriving independently at the same conclusion, that at the highest level of heaven that human language can describe, the primary activity is remembering. Now, I want to bring this back to where we started tonight, to the vulnerability I shared with you in the darkness before the teaching began. I told you I sometimes lie awake, wondering whether heaven is a place that remembers me, whether any of that ancient sacred architecture has room for someone carrying what I carry, whether the distance between here and whatever is up there is a distance that love can actually cross. And now, having walked through all 6 layers, I want to answer that question, not with theology, with the manuscript, with what 2 Enoch actually says. The 6th heaven is not a distant administrative function. It is not a cold archive of facts maintained by indifferent beings. It is a layer of heaven, specifically designed, specifically populated, specifically governed by the wisest of archangels, for the purpose of making sure that nothing is forgotten, that no life is overlooked, that no human being who has ever drawn breath on this earth slips through unrecorded, unnoticed, unloved. Pravwil, the wisest of all archangels, whose name appears in exactly 1 ancient text, is keeping your record right now, tonight, while you are lying here, feeling small, feeling tired, feeling the weight of whatever today placed on you. Pravul is writing, and what he is writing is you, not a summary of you, not a judgment of you, not a verdict waiting to be rendered, a record, the specific, irreplaceable, unrepeatable record of a human life that heaven considered worth keeping from the beginning, in detail, with the wisest being available, assigned to make sure it was done properly. I have thought about Pravuil many times, more times than I expected to when I first found his name in this manuscript. I think about what it means, that of all the things 2 Enoch could have placed in the 6th heaven, of all the functions it could have assigned to the highest describable layer, it chose remembering. It chose keeping. It chose the activity of making sure nothing is lost. And it chose to say that the being most fitted for that task, the being wise enough, patient enough, careful enough to do it properly, is the wisest of all archangels, as though remembering a human life requires the best heaven has, as though you and everyone you have ever loved, and everyone who has ever carried anything in the dark are worth that level of attention, that level of care, that level of wisdom applied to the task of making sure you are not forgotten. I find that, night traveler, not merely comforting. I find it almost overwhelming, in the best way, in the way of a truth that is larger than the anxiety that prompted the question, in the way of an answer that does not just satisfy the ache, but makes the ache seem small, by comparison, to what is actually keeping watch. No, there is one more thing, one more layer, or rather, one more threshold, because 2 Enoch does not describe the 7th heaven from inside. It only describes Enoch approaching it, standing at its outer edge, looking toward what lies beyond, and the words the Slavonic manuscript uses to describe what Enoch encounters at that threshold are the words I promised you at the beginning of this night. The words I said would explain why the ancient scribes who copied this text chose to stop writing. At exactly that point, we are going there now, just a little further, past Pravul's writing desk, past the 7 groups of archangels with their records, past the continuous Kaidusha of the 6th layer, toward the threshold of something that 3,000 years of human language has never quite managed to describe, the 7th heaven. I want to approach this carefully, not because I am uncertain about what the manuscript says, but because what the manuscript says deserves to be approached carefully. It deserves the kind of slowness we give to things that are genuinely too large for hurry. So let me tell you first what 2 Enoch does not do here. It does not describe the 7th heaven the way it described the other 6. It does not give us beings with assignments. It does not give us named angels with specific functions. It does not give us rivers or gardens or records or silent multitudes or escorted sons. It does not give us the inside of the 7th layer at all. And I think that is deliberate. I think the writers of this manuscript and the tradition behind them understood something about the 7th heaven that made description feel not merely difficult, but wrong. Not wrong in the sense of forbidden, wrong in the sense of inadequate, wrong in the sense of a word that is too small for what it is trying to hold, wrong in the sense of a hand reaching for something and finding that the reaching itself is as far as the hand can go. What 2 Enoch gives us instead is the threshold, the approach, the moment just before Enoch ascending from the 6th heaven, from Pravul's archive, from the continuous writing of the wisest archangel, moving upward toward the 7th, and what he encounters there at the outer edge of the 7th layer is described in the Slavonic manuscript with a phrase that I have carried with me since the first night I read it. The phrase, in its essence, in the closest English can come to what the Slavonic preserves, is this: a great light, and a silence greater than all the heavens, a silence greater than all the heavens. Let me say that again. Not a silence like the 2nd heaven, where darkness holds weeping faces. Not a silence like the 5th heaven, where stopped singing holds downcast faces. A silence greater than all the heavens. A silence that is not the absence of something, but the presence of something so complete, so total, so far beyond what the 6 layers below it can contain, that the only honest word for it is silence, because every other word, every other description every other language available to human beings or angelic beings or ancient scribes copying manuscripts in cold Slavonic monasteries, is too small, too thin, too approximate, too much like a lamp held up to the sun and called illumination. So the text stops, not because the writer ran out of things to say, but because the seventh heaven ran out of things that saying could reach. And I think, night traveler, that stopping is itself a form of worship. The ancient scribes who wrote this, who copied it, who preserved it through centuries, understood that there are places where the most honest response to what exists is not more words. It is the silence that comes after the words have done everything they can do, and then stepped aside. The silence that says, I have taken you as far as language goes. The rest you will have to feel. Now, I want to tell you something about that phrase. A silence greater than all the heavens. Because it does not only describe the threshold of the seventh layer, it also quietly describes what all 6 layers below it are building toward. Think about what we have moved through tonight. The first heaven, governing the weather, the stars, the veil of night and day. The second heaven, holding the darkness, the weeping, the ancient rebellion in its long waiting. The third heaven, the garden on the eastern side, the shadow on the northern side, the tree of life tended and waiting. The fourth heaven, the sun's procession, Puruel at the eastern gate, the moon's chambers, the sacred engine of time. The fifth heaven, the silent Grigori, the stopped Kedusha, the downcast faces, and some of them lifting. The sixth heaven, Prevoil writing, the 7 groups of archangels keeping records. Your life kept in the wisest archive in creation. All of it moving upward. All of it building. All of it pointing toward the same direction. Toward a silence that is not emptiness, but fullness. A fullness so complete that it has no need of sound. No need of weather governance. No need of record keeping. No need of escorted suns or tended gardens or imprisoned darkness or stopped singing. No need of any of the 6 layers below it, because it already contains everything those layers are trying to point toward. Everything they are trying to protect. Everything they are trying to keep. Everything they are trying to praise. It is already there, in the silence, greater than all the heavens. Now, I want to say something before the voice grows slower, before the teaching gives way to rest, before we move from the mind into the body, into the quiet, into the night that the first heaven prepared for you. What I want to say is this. You did not need to understand every detail of tonight to receive what tonight was offering. You did not need to memorize the layers. You did not need to hold every name. Pravuil, Puruel, Kedusha, Grigori, Paridesa. You did not need to carry all of that consciously into sleep. What tonight was offering was something simpler than all those names. It was a picture of heaven as a place that is not vague, not distant, not indifferent, not too large to include you. A picture of heaven as a structure that governs the night you are sleeping inside, that holds the darkness you sometimes feel, that tends the garden that is waiting for you, that escorts the light that finds you every morning, that holds space for the voices that have gone quiet and keeps calling them back, and keeps your record in the wisest archive in creation by the wisest being available, who has never once set down the pen. That is what tonight was offering, and whether you received it as theology, or as comfort, or as ancient cosmology, or simply as the sound of a voice in the dark, telling you that you are not forgotten, it was yours. It has always been yours. The 6 heavens are standing, the 7th is silent, and you are held inside all of it, right now, tonight, in this exact moment, as the teaching ends and the rest begins. Let the study settle now, night traveler. We are moving from the mind into the body, from the layers into the quiet, from the ancient words into the silence greater than all the heavens. From this moment, only the voice, only the dark, only the rest. Let the breathing change now, not by force, not by effort, simply by permission. You have been listening and thinking and climbing through layers tonight. And now the climbing is done. There is nowhere left to go. No next layer waiting. No next name to hold. No next detail to carry. Only this. Only the dark around you. Only the breath moving in and the breath moving out. And the night doing what the first heaven prepared it to do. Holding you quietly, without asking anything in return. Let the shoulders release now. If they have been carrying something, let them set it down, not permanently, just for tonight, just for these hours. The weight will still be there in the morning if you need it, but tonight it can rest beside you. Instead of on you, let the jaw unclench, let the hands open, let the space behind the eyes grow softer. You have done enough for one day. You have carried enough for one day. You have thought enough for one night, and now the night takes over. From here, the voice will simply walk beside you. Let the breathing change now, not by force, not by effort, not by deciding to breathe differently, simply by allowing, by giving the body permission to do what it already knows how to do, what it has been doing every night of your life, without instruction, without help, without anyone needing to explain it. The body knows how to rest. It has always known. You only have to stop asking it to do something else. You have climbed a long way tonight, through 6 layers, through ancient names and specific details and 3,000 years of carefully preserved cosmology, through the governed first heaven above your roof, through the weeping darkness of the second, through the garden and its shadow in the third, through the sun's procession and the moon's chambers in the fourth, through the silence of the Grigori in the fifth, through Pravul's archive in the sixth, through the threshold of a 7th heaven that stopped the oldest scribe's mid-sentence. You have climbed all of that tonight, and now the climbing is finished. There is no next layer, no next name, no next detail waiting to be understood. Only this. Only the dark around you. Only the breath moving in and moving out, and the night doing exactly what it was prepared to do, holding you without asking anything in return. Tender. Let the shoulders release now. If they have been carrying something tonight, let them set it down. Not permanently, not forever. Just for these hours, just for the length of this night. Whatever was heavy today can rest beside you now. Instead of on you, you are not required to carry it through sleep. Sleep does not ask for that. Sleep asks for almost nothing, only that you arrive, only that you let the held things be held by something other than you. For a little while, for tonight, let the jaw soften. Let the hands open. Let the space behind the eyes grow quieter. You have done enough for one day. You have thought enough for one night. And now, the night takes over. From here, slower. Imagine, if you are willing, a room below, not above. We have been going upward all night, through layers stacked above this world, through heavens built toward a silence greater than all of them. But now, the imagination descends, gently, downward, into the deep quiet. There are stone steps, not many, only enough to feel the descent in the body. Each step a little cooler than the one above it. Each step a little further from the noise of the day. Each step a little deeper into a stillness that has been here, waiting long before tonight. The sound of the world above thins with each step, not cut off, only gentled. The way sound gentles when a heavy door closes softly between you and everything that was loud. And with each step down, the body grows heavier in the good way. The way the body grows heavy when it finally accepts that the day is over, that nothing further is required, that the work of wakefulness is finished, and the work of rest has already begun. At the bottom of the steps, a room, low ceiling, stone walls worn smooth by years of quiet, not cold stone, kept stone, stone that has been in the presence of warmth and light and careful human attention for long enough, that it holds a gentleness in its surface, the gentleness of a place that has been loved, without needing to announce it. And along every wall, shelves, floor to ceiling, shelves of kept things, old books with spines worn soft by many hands, wrapped manuscripts resting in their cloth, bound volumes that have outlasted the centuries they were born in, resting here now, in the deep quiet, not performing, not waiting to be impressive, only resting the way everything rests, when it has been kept long enough, in a place that knows how to keep things. The smell of the room is beeswax and old paper, that particular fragrance that belongs only to places where care has been practiced for a very long time, where someone decided, long before you arrived, that these things were worth keeping, and kept them season after season, year after year, century after century, until keeping became simply the nature of the place, until the room itself became an act of faithfulness, just by existing, just by continuing to hold what it was given to hold. There is a particular peace, night traveler, in being in a room full of kept things, not the peace of excitement, not the peace of discovery, the peace of arrival, the peace of a place that says, without saying anything, you may rest here. Things that matter are kept in this room, and you are here, so you already understand what that means about you. In the center of the room, a table, low, worn smooth at its edges, the way furniture gets worn smooth when it has been returned to, again and again, by hands that needed it. Not damaged, smoothed, the visible record of return, of being needed and coming back to, of a thing that has been, in the oldest sense of the word, used. On the table, a single candle, not tall, not dramatic, a small candle burning with the steady, unhurried flame of something that has been burning a long time and is in no hurry to finish. Its light does not fill the room. It only holds a circle, a small, warm circle around the table, around the chair beside it, around the nearest shelves where the spines of old books catch the light softly and hold it, the way kept things hold light, gently, without trying. And beyond that circle, the room recedes into a darkness that is not frightening, only deep, the kind of darkness that belongs to places where things are kept rather than displayed, where the purpose is not to be seen, but to remain. Pause, breathe, sit down now, In the chair beside the table, feel the weight of the body settling into it. Feel the chair receiving that weight, without complaint, without asking how long you intend to stay, without requiring explanation or justification or performance, simply receiving, the way good chairs receive tired bodies, the way good rooms receive tired people, the way this room receives you. No, tonight, without hesitation, the candle flame is very still. There is no draught here. No wind finds its way into this deep room. The flame burns in a perfect stillness, a thin, steady column of warmth that has been burning since before you arrived, and will continue burning after you have closed your eyes. You do not have to watch it. It does not need watching. It only needs to be near, and it is near. It has always been near, warmer. The shelves around you hold things you do not need to read tonight. You do not need to open any of them. You do not need to know what every volume contains. You do not need to understand the language of every manuscript, or the century of every binding, or the name of every hand that copied every page. It is enough simply to be in a room where they are kept, where the act of keeping has been going on long enough to have become the personality of the place, where you can feel, without being told, that this is what this room does. It keeps things carefully, faithfully, without drama, without announcement, without requiring the kept things to be famous or impressive or useful to anyone in particular. Only worth keeping. That is the only requirement worth keeping. And in this room, that bar has never been difficult to meet. Let the breath go a little slower now. Not because you are trying to breathe slowly, only because the room has that effect. Deep rooms do. Old libraries do. Places that have been quiet for a very long time. Invite the body to match their rhythm. And the rhythm of this room is slow, very slow. The rhythm of a place that measures time, not in minutes, but in the gradual darkening of old paper, in the slow softening of leather spines, in the patient accumulation of dust on surfaces that no one disturbs. Because disturbance is not what this place is for. This place is for remaining. And tonight, so are you. Pause, breathe. If the mind returns to the layers now, let it return gently. Not to study them, not to hold them carefully, not to make sure you have memorized them correctly, only to let them rest behind you, like the shelves behind the chair. Present, keeping, requiring nothing. The first heaven is still governing the night you are inside. The veil has been drawn. The dark has been prepared. The 200 angels are still attending to the weather of this world, as they have attended to it since before this world had a name. The second heaven is holding what it holds. The darkness is still there. The weeping is still there. But it is held within the structure, within the governance, within a divine order that does not pretend it away, but contains it firmly, faithfully, without flinching. The third heaven is tending the garden right now, tonight, while you rest. The angels whose assignment is paradise are attending to it. The fruit is on the branches. The 4 rivers are flowing, honey and milk and oil and wine moving through a garden that has been kept ready. For longer than human longing has been reaching toward it, the tree of life is there, still there, tended, waiting, without impatience, without urgency, simply ready. The 4th heaven has completed its work for today. The sun finished its procession. Peruel closed the eastern gate behind it. The light was gathered in. The night was released. The moon entered its chamber, and the dark arrived here, to you, on time, as it always does. as it has done every night of your life, without fail, without exception, without a single evening where the darkness did not come to give the light somewhere to rest, and you, somewhere to rest. Inside, the light's resting. The fifth heaven is holding its silence. The great stillness of the Grigori, the stopped singing, the ancient withdrawal from the Kedusha is still there. But so is this. Somewhere in that silence, some faces are lifted toward the song they were made for, turned back toward the continuous praise that has never stopped. In any other layer, holy, 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 very quiet now, very distant, like something heard from many rooms away, through stone, through deep quiet, through the thickness of a night that has been carefully prepared. Only the faintest shape of it, like the smell of old paper, present without pressing, there without demanding, keeping its song, even here, even now, even in this deep room where you are resting. Pause, breathe, and Pravuil is writing. Right now, tonight, the pen does not rest. The record does not pause. The sixth heaven does not close its archive for the night, simply because the one being recorded has closed their eyes. If anything, the quiet of your sleeping gives Pravuil the particular stillness in which the most careful writing is done, the most precise, the most complete, the most faithful to every detail of a life being kept in the wisest archive in all of creation. Your name is there, not as a number, not as a category, as a name, specific, unrepeatable, yours, written by the wisest of all archangels, who was assigned this work before you were born, and will continue it long after tonight. You do not have to do anything with that knowledge. You do not have to feel it strongly. You do not have to be moved by it. You only have to let it rest beside you, like the candle, like the shelves, like the deep room itself. Present, keeping, faithful, requiring nothing from you, only your presence, which you are already giving, simply by being here, simply by breathing. Reverent, the candle is lower now. Its circle of light has grown smaller, more intimate, the kind of light that belongs to the last long hours of a faithful burning, the kind of light that no longer tries to illuminate the whole room, only the immediate, only what is right here, right now, and right here, right now, is only this breath, dark, quiet, the smell of kept things, the sound of nothing moving, the sense of being inside a room that has been holding things carefully for longer than any one person can imagine, and will continue holding them long after the candle goes out, long after this night ends, long after you wake tomorrow and return to whatever the day brings. The kept things will still be here. The room will still be here. Pravuil will still be writing. The garden will still be tended. The first heaven will still be drawing the veil. The shepherd is watching tonight. He has always been watching, through every layer, through every heaven, through the governed night of the first, and the held darkness of the second, and the tended garden of the third, and the faithful procession of the fourth, and the ancient silence of the fifth, and the open archive of the sixth, and the great stillness beyond the seventh. He has been watching. He knows which layer holds your name. He knows where the record is kept. He knows what Pravuil has written, and what Pravuil is still writing, and what will be written in the pages that have not yet been filled. He knows. Pause, breathe. He knows what you carried today, not in the way of a distant observer who noticed from afar, in the way of the one who was already carrying it, beside you, before you knew you needed carrying. He knows the weight of this particular day, in this particular life, in this particular body, lying here now, in this particular dark. He knows, and he is not surprised by any of it, not by the heaviness, not by the questions, not by the doubt that sometimes sits beside the faith, like the shadow on the northern side of the third heaven, present, held, within the same layer as the garden. He is not surprised. He is not troubled. He is not looking away. Pause, breathe. The 6 heavens are standing tonight, as they stood last night, as they will stand tomorrow night. The first heaven drawing the veil, the second heaven holding what must be held, the third heaven keeping the garden ready, the fourth heaven having completed its procession, the fifth heaven holding its silence and its lifted faces, the sixth heaven keeping your record, all of it standing, all of it governed, all of it under the same watchfulness that has never, in all the long history of heaven and earth, looked away from you. Not once, not for a moment, not even in the hours when you felt most alone, most forgotten, most unsure whether the distance between here and there was a distance love could cross. It crossed. It always crosses. Pause, breathe. The 7th is silent, that great silence, larger than all the heavens, resting above everything tonight, above the archive, above the song, above the garden and the darkness and the procession and the governed night, above all of it, patient, complete, unchanged by anything that has happened below it, undisturbed by anything the layers contain, simply there, as it has always been there, as it will always be there, holding everything, without effort, without strain, the way only the largest things hold, the way only the most complete things hold, the way only love, at its most total, holds. Pause, breathe, and you, night traveler, are held inside all of it, right now, in this exact moment, in this exact dark, in this exact body, with this exact weight, and these exact questions, and this exact tiredness that is finally being set down. You are held by the first heaven above your roof, by the record in the 6th, by the garden in the 3rd, waiting for you, by the shepherd who knows every layer, and every name in every layer, and every life behind every name. You are held. Pause, breathe. Sleep now. The shepherd is watching. The archive is kept. The garden is tended. The night was prepared. Pravul is writing. The silence, above all the heavens, is holding everything, including you, especially you. Sleep now, night traveler. The 6 heavens are standing. The 7th is silent, and you are held. Good night.